It's time for a gaming moment.
One of the most ambitious games ever made has to be No Man's Sky. It was huge on a legendary scale, with apparently over 18 quintillion different planets to see, which, to put that in perspective, if you spent 1 second on each of these different planets and removed all the in-between travelling time, it would still take you a whopping 585 billion years to visit them all. And to think that all this came from a developer whose previous game was Joe Danger. Now that's quite a step up. The game was seen parading around the E3 stage for years, but the question that everyone kept asking was this: what do you actually do in No Man's Sky? Well, hopefully today I'll clear that up. So the game was split into two parts, the flying sections and the on-foot sections. Now the flying sections put you in your little spaceship and were basically your main means of getting around. The overarching aim of the game was to reach the centre of the universe, but for this you needed to gather the resources needed to warp drive. And as well as warp drive, your ship also had 3 other different speeds, one for getting between planets, one for speeding through the skies, and one slower speed for when you were getting ready to land. So already you can tell that this game was ginormous. Each of these little dots was a fully explorable solar system filled with planets and moons, with each of these large enough to take literally hours to walk across. In fact, it's worth pointing out now that every single player plays No Man's Sky in the exact same universe, but the chances are that you will never see another soul. In fact, your best chance of having contact with another player was simply by seeing their name as the original discoverer of an object or place, along with the time and date that they found it. It's funny to think that in say 5 years time when you land on something that was first discovered in 2016, the chances are that nobody else set foot on that planet in all that time. So anyway, onto what you do outside of your ship. Now really this was where the main bulk of the exploration and resource gathering was done. You were armed with a mining gun which you could use to chip away at resources with, from aluminium to carbon to plutonium. These materials were then collected to then be used to either craft something, repair something, or to be stored away to later be sold on the galactic market. To help you track down a particular resource that you wanted, you also had a scanner which popped up which resources were where, as well as an analyzer which you could use to identify new creatures and plants with. There was a surprising amount of detail and variety to each of these planets, considering how many of them there were, and no two that I ever came across were exactly the same. The animals were all a kind of mad Frankenstein experiment, with various body parts being cobbled together to form something new, and even after dozens of hours of playing, the wildlife still managed to throw up some surprising creatures. And as for the planets themselves, they weren't just a copy and paste job with the odd palette change. No, each planet did feel unique and surprisingly well crafted, with lakes and caves and even the odd abandoned building to explore. There were different atmospheres and weathers to worry about, with everything from acid rain to incoming storms. There was definitely a survival element to the game because you had a life support system and a hazmat suit that would slowly deteriorate in bad conditions, so it had to be repaired. Thankfully, the materials that you needed to do the repairs were all common and your suit didn't degrade that fast, so it wasn't a constant pain in the ass. I think the main hook of the game though was the fact that there was always something to upgrade, whether it is your ship's boosters, your mining gun's cooldown rate, your sprint speed. You were always only a few materials away from that next enhancement. No Man's Sky did have a few different elements of combat about it, but don't make the mistake of thinking that this was an FPS. The only real thing that needed shooting were these Sentinel robots that would vary in aggression depending upon the planet that you were on, and the space dogfights were fun but nothing too complex. It wasn't about completing missions or even about achieving an ultimate goal, it was about the journey rather than the destination, hence why it popped up big, journey milestone accomplished, when you had done something a certain number of times. During the opening sort of tutorial, you were led to a bunch of unique types of landmarks that you could come across in the game, like alien monoliths or abandoned distress beacons. Unfortunately, these sound a lot more interesting than they actually were. Usually they just provided access to another upgrade, which there were already a ton of. These upgrades were usually only rewarded though if you answered correctly to some form of alien test. It was like an old choose your own adventure book and even had the odd math question to answer. Only problem was, often you didn't speak the alien's language, so you had no idea what was being asked of you. However, this led to what I thought was one of the coolest mechanics of the game, where as you explored, you would slowly learn new alien words, so as you got more fluent, you would have a better chance of answering the questions right. So in a nutshell, that is No Man's Sky. It was all about dangling carrots in front of players' noses, constantly giving them slight upgrades to work towards. Soon you would find your own technique for best achieving these. For example, soon I stopped looking for materials that I needed and instead went out to mine whatever was in high demand, to then sell at a good price and then just buy whatever I wanted with the profits. Or, as another option, you could always have spent your time finding all of the different animals on any given planet to then receive a large boost in funds. So in a way, It even kind of had a Pokemon element to it. Inventory space was always tight, so ideally you wanted to buy a spaceship with a large amount of cargo space. But rather than dish out the hundreds of thousands of units needed to buy a new one, you could always search the land for a crashed one, repair it up to good nick, and you were off. It was a type of game that was relaxing, the kind that was perfect to play while listening to music or a podcast. When I wasn't playing it, I was thinking about it, which can only be a good thing, and there was even a certain strange feeling knowing that you were the first and probably the only person to ever visit some of these planets. And as an old math student, I would love to know the formula of how a game could ever be made this big. And by the way, if you did like No Man's Sky, then I've got to give a quick shout out to the game Adios, which was basically a 2D physics-based No Man's Sky, but also with a bunch of different hats. Check it out. If you enjoyed this video, then click here to subscribe to A's Gaming Moments, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.